Our next speaker is Dr. Shyam Raja, Associate Vice President, Technology and Engineering at Praj Industries Limited, Pune. He had his Masters in Life Science with specialization in Environmental Biology from Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning and PhD in Environmental Science and Engineering from IIT Mumbai. He has more than 25 years of engineering and construction experience in the field of water and wastewater treatment. He has worked across all relevant departments of wastewater business, which includes process design, R&D, and project management. He has expertise and knowledge based in advanced wastewater treatment processes and has designed and executed wastewater recycle plants for industrial clients. He has worked with many reputed MNCs in India as well as the Middle East marketers like Reliance India Limited, Hindustan Petroleum, ITC, etc. With all this brief introduction, I would like to welcome Dr. Shyam Raja for his presentation. Welcome, sir.
Sairam and pranams to everyone. And I would like to make this presentation as a humble offering at the lotus feet of my loving Lord. I would like to thank the entire chemistry department for having given me this opportunity to make a presentation on a subject that has been probably a little slightly different from what you have been hearing for the last 1.5 days. So when Professor Sundaresan asked me to speak something on water and wastewater, and he told me that the symposium is on advances in chemical sciences. I was wondering whether this is the subject that would interest some of the budding research scholars in the institute. But I think water is one of the most important part of our life, and without water, we cannot obviously survive. So I would like to once again extend my thanks to the entire team for this opportunity, and I will try to make it as short and as interesting as possible. I'm sure you all have had a good lunch, and being a Sunday afternoon, most of us want to relax on a Sunday afternoon so that we are ready for the next day. Nevertheless, I will walk you through this presentation on water and wastewater, where I will first handle the water treatment plan, which is the drinking water, and then I will take you through what is wastewater treatment. So basically, it will be an overview, and if you have any questions, you can note it down and ask me at the end of the session. I'll also briefly introduce my company where I'm working. I'm currently the Associate Vice President and heading the Technology and Process Engineering department of the Water and Wastewater unit of my company. The company is almost 37 years old, and we have our presence in 750. We have 750 references and presence in more than 75 countries all over the world. So predominantly, Praj Industry is into bioenergy. Basically, we are the leaders in distilleries and breweries. And most of the distilleries and breweries in the country, like more than 70-75%, has been set up by Praj Industries. And we have 5 verticals, the main being bioenergy, which is categorized as 1G, that is bioethanol. And the other one is 2G, which is called as the ethanol for blending with oil, that is basically your diesel or petrol, which is gaining more and more importance now with this fossil fuel being exhausted. The other division we have is high purity, where we manufacture and we produce very high purity water, especially for the pharma and cosmetic industries, where they require very, very sterile water for their formulations. And we also have a very big fabrication unit, wherein we do fabrication of large equipments, very, very large equipments, and we supply it to many of these contractors like L&T and other big companies who are into engineering projects. And one of the main vertical where I am associated with is water, wastewater, where we give complete water treatment as well as wastewater treatment solution as a turnkey contractor. We design, engineer, supply, and erect and also commission the plant. We also do operation and maintenance of these plants. And we are one of the very few companies in India who can offer the complete end-to-end solutions in water and wastewater, including what is called as ZLD, that is zero liquid discharge, which is becoming more and more relevant today because the Pollution Control Board is tightening their nose in all these industries where they have been releasing all the water outside the premises and polluting the environment around. So now they have been asked to put up a ZLD plan where not a single drop of water can go out and pollute the environment, and you have to recycle and reuse all the wastewater that is generated. We also have a very big, this is our basic R&D, which is called as Matrix. It's a 100 crore investment. We do a lot of research. We have almost 100 scientists, all of them PhDs, and also a lot of postgraduates who are working on many of the solutions that we offer to our customers. And it includes the development of new products which is more environment friendly and green chemicals. And we also have a facility where we can do piloting of the products that we are doing a lot of research and giving to the chemical industries predominantly. So we have a very large facility where we do all the piloting, and then it is scaled up to the field scale units. Coming to the main topic on water. We all know water, the elixir of life, Amrit, what all. It has been given all the important names because without water, we don't exist. It's a very precious resource. And as you can see, the distribution of water on Earth's surface is very, very uneven, extremely uneven. Only 3% of water on the surface is actually fresh. The remaining 97% is ocean. Out of the fresh water, 69% resides in the glaciers, all as ice, 30% as underground, and less than 1% in lakes and rivers, which is the main source of water for all of us, not only human beings, but even the other living beings. So if you see 1% of water on Earth's surface is usable by all the living beings on Earth, including 7.8 billion human beings as of today. It's going to increase more. And 99% of this is unusable. So we can understand it's not a finite source. It's not an infinite source. It's a finite source. And therefore, for future sustenance, it is imminent that we need to reduce the consumption of water as much as possible. We need to conserve it. Not only that, we have to also reduce, recycle, and reuse as much water as possible. The main use of water that is available for human beings are basically can be categorized as domestic and industrial use. And domestic use, most of the usage is for drinking, cooking, washing, gardening, and all the bathrooms washings. Whereas the industrial use, you have boiler feed water, then you have demineralized water. And as I told you earlier, high purity, that is your pharma and food waste. And of course, a lot of these industries like textiles, tanneries, pulp and paper consume a lot of water to produce 1 unit of the product. And so you can see how the water consumption is is only increasing day by day with both industrialization as well as the increase in population. It may seem very simple, but water is one of the most it's one of the most trickiest chemistry. So there lies your chemistry in this. Water chemistry is very intriguing. It's very difficult to understand, though it looks very simple. So when you have the main source of water, that is the source of drinking water, which are the streams, the lakes, rivers, and aquifers, which is your groundwater. And then we are looking more and more onto the oceans because the freshwater source is limited. So now we have more and more people putting up the desalination plants where seawater is converted to drinking water. This is more predominant in the Middle East, where there is absolutely no source of fresh water. They have to depend on the seawater, and the seawater is converted into drinking water. Let's look at some of the natural contaminants in the drinking water source that we have. So if you look at the surface water, that is the rivers and lakes, predominantly it contains suspended solids and colloidal matter. So most of the time you find that these resources are highly turbid, and you can see a lot of suspensions in this water. It also contains a lot of dissolved iron because iron is one of the most common elements on this Earth's crust. And besides, some of the sources also have color and some sort of a taste, mild taste. And there are also resources where there are runoff, which is called as the agricultural runoff, like pesticides and other things, which also contaminate the surface water that is available. And of course, pathogens like bacteria, virus, and to a certain extent, algae, depends on what is the source and where the source lies. As far as the groundwater is concerned, predominantly it is all dissolved. You have very less suspended solids because by the time it reaches to the bottom of the aquifer, it is already filtered through the layers of sand and then rocks. And then by the time it comes down, the suspended solids are filtered naturally. However, it picks up a lot of the elements that are there, like the fluorides, arsenic, nitrates, iron, and a lot of dissolved salts. But if you see most of the cases, it is hardness. It is calcium and magnesium which causes hardness of the water. So typically in Puttaparthi also, if you see, we have been using the groundwater as the main source of drinking and all other activities. It is slightly hard. It is not a very soft water. When you drink, you can find that it is a little hard. It is very difficult to form the soap. And then the final source is seawater. If we don't get surface water adequately, we have to look into the seawater as a source. So the main contaminants in seawater are the zooplanktons, which are floating matter predominantly. And then you have algal blooms that come in suddenly, and you have all these red algae and green algae taking vast expanse of the seawater. And of course, predominantly dissolved salt, that is sodium chloride. So it's normally around 3 to 4.5%, depending on which side of the globe the ocean lies. I'll take you through a pictorial tour of how the drinking water treatment is done. So if you see this, most of the drinking water, that is the surface source, be it river, streams, are very turbid. We can say that this is a raw water, and this water has to be converted to drinking water, which has to be odorless, colorless, soft, and it should be free from any suspended solid. So it should be as clear as this. And that's why nowadays we are taking a lot of bottled water, which is actually highly treated before it is bottled. There are drinking standards that has been set up by every government. As far as Indian government is concerned, there is an IS standard, which is called as IS 10500, where you can see the most of the parameters which are most important for drinking is color. Up to 5 Hazen units is what is permitted. Then you have odor. It should be agreeable. Most of us wouldn't like to drink water which has got slight odor. The pH should be in the range of 6.5 to 8.5. And the taste also should be agreeable in the sense that sometimes the water tastes very bad and we are not able to drink the water. The turbidity has to be less than 1 NTU, that is nephelometric unit. And dissolved solids, though what is desired is less than 200, which is normally the soft water or sweet water, what we call. But up to 500, you can still make it drinkable. The maximum limit is around 2000 milligrams per liter. So these are all milligrams per liter. So what are the objectives, the primary objectives of water treatment for drinking? First and foremost thing that we need to attack is the particulate matter, which is the colloidal or the muddy constituent of the water. And to remove these particulates, we use a lot of chemistry in terms of for actually settling this matter. So if you naturally keep the water for some time in a container, the solids, the suspended solids gradually settle down. Then you get a fairly clear water at the top, which can be decanted and used for drinking. Still, it will have colloidal matter, which is not desirable to consume. Hence, there are different steps in the water treatment plan where you actually target different constituents, which I had mentioned earlier. So the first one, as I told you, is removal of particulates, where you add coagulants. Essentially, it is iron or aluminum-based coagulants. These are alum or ferric chloride, which is used. And these coagulants basically break the charges. All the colloids are normally negatively charged. When you add these metal coagulants, which are positively charged, they neutralize the charge on the colloids. And then they start forming, since they don't otherwise settle because the density is very low. Coagulation helps in discharging these charges on the colloid matter, and they come together. Now, when they come together, they start forming larger particles and the density increases slowly. To aid this density increase, we add something what is called as a flocculant. So generally for drinking water, these are high purity flocculants, and because these are synthetic chemicals and it is not desirable, but still sometimes flocculants are added. It's called as a polyelectrolyte, and then it increases the weight or the density of these particles and it settles very fast. So you have the first step of solid separations from the water, and that is your settling tanks. And further, the colloidal matter which doesn't settle goes through a filtration unit, which we call as a rapid gravity filter or sand filter. Essentially, sand is the media. And then it can also be taken through membranes. The latest technologies are when you provide these ultrafiltration membranes, where it can take off almost 99.9% of the colloidal matter. And what comes out, the permeate is absolutely clear. And it's you can drink the water directly, of course, after disinfection. Now, some of the water source, since it contains hardness, like especially the groundwater, if it is used for drinking, we need to take out the hardness, that is the calcium and magnesium hardness. So if you have you have permanent and also temporary hardness. So temporary hardness can be removed by simply boiling the water. All the calcium and magnesium carbonates, they just precipitate. However, for permanent hardness, which is predominantly chloride and sulfates of calcium and magnesium, you need to precipitate this by using lime soda softening. Now, once the dissolved salts are precipitated, then there are certain components, like as I told you, there might be some residual pesticides, which you need to completely take it out from the water, for which we use adsorption, which is predominantly carbon adsorption, activated carbon. And then sometimes there are some volatile components in the water, which is not very common, but sometimes it is there, and then you can use air stripping. Now, if the pesticides they persist in the drinking water, you can use an oxidation process where you oxidize the pesticide and further treat it through another set of carbon filters and get it absorbed. And finally, the pathogens, that is bacteria and virus, which is also very, very important to the remove. You need to disinfect it, and for disinfection, we use predominantly chlorination, because chlorine has a very high life as they form chloramines, and the presence of chloramines actually prevent reintroduction of the bacteria into the water. So most of the water after treatment is stored in large tanks or in reservoirs, where it is further distributed down to the population or at the end of use. So hence, it has to be ensured that there is no recontamination of bacteria. And that's why chlorine is predominantly used. However, we can still use UV radiation and also ozonation as the disinfection agent. So this is a flow sheet, a very common flow sheet for drinking water treatment. So you have the source, that is the lake, and there's an intake pipe from where it goes through a preliminary screening, because many of these sources are open. So you have a lot of floating, especially if it is near the vegetation, you have a lot of floating matter like leaves and other things which come. So you just have a very, very crude type of a treatment where you remove the floating matter, either manually, which is okay for a very small capacity, but for very large capacities, most of the municipal corporations have in million liters per day. The capacity is mentioned as 100 million, 200 million, 500 million. So these are all very huge water treatment plants. So obviously you require mechanisms. So you have mechanical screens. We also call it as a traveling screen. And then it comes to a lift station where it has to be pumped to the water treatment area. And so we provide a lot of pumps depending on the capacity of the water. That is the output capacity of the water. And the water, drinking water, the raw water is pumped into a coagulation or a settling tank, before which the chemicals are added, the chemical coagulants are added. You also have a pre-chlorination step initially, because there are certain dissolved iron which is in the form of Fe2+, and you need to convert into Fe3+, which actually comes out as particulate matter, and it can be settled downstream in the flocculation or the settling tank. So the chemical is added into this flocculation tank where your coagulation and flocculation process takes place. It's roughly around half an hour you give time for the chemicals to react. And then it is taken into a sedimentation basin. It's basically a settler, so you have huge tanks which is either circular or rectangular in shape. And then you have a mechanical system to remove the sludge that is settled at the bottom of this tank. So you have the sedimentation where you have a slope at the bottom, and then all the settled sludge can be removed from here, from this bottom of the tank, and the clear water overflows. So this is, you must remember, this is a continuous process. So this pumping and this entire thing is going on 24/7, 365 days, except for some days when it is taken out for maintenance. Still, every system is given a standby so that there is no time where the water treatment is not operational. So further, after the segmentation basin, as I told you, there are some colloidal matter still remaining in the overflow of the settling tank. So it's taken into a rapid gravity sand filter, where the you can see that the bottom is of gravel. You have the support structure as a gravel, and then you have sand on top, and then anthracite. Anthracite is diatomaceous earth, so it has some absorption capacities. So some of the obnoxious dissolved matter is absorbed onto anthracite, and then the colloids are filtered through this, and the filtered water is then taken into a post-chlorination tank where you need to disinfect to remove the bacteria and viruses. So we add around 1 to 2 milligram per liter of chlorine, which is sufficient enough to take care of the bacteria and virus, to kill most of them. And then during the distribution stage, before the distribution, after this treatment, it goes again into a reservoir. And from the reservoir, it is pumped into overhead tanks. And the water distribution is done through the overhead tanks. Now, the residual chlorine which is there takes care of the prevention of recontamination of bacteria and virus back into the drinking water. So this is an overall scheme of how a normal drinking water is treated in a municipal level treatment unit. So if it is a groundwater, as I told you, you need to take out the dissolved matter like hardness, and then again disinfect, because again we have a reservoir downstream before it is used for consumption. So these are some of the units, the actual units that are given in a water treatment plan. What you see here is a cascade aerator. It looks like a very beautiful fountain, but actually what is done is the raw water contains iron in the form of Fe2+, and when you aerate it naturally, the oxygen diffuses into the water, and it oxidizes the Fe2+ into Fe3+, which is particulate in matter, and the iron particle settles on these steps. So basically, you are removing the iron, you're converting the dissolved iron into particulate iron, and then taking it out before it goes into the sedimentation tank or the clarifiers. So on the right side, you see the sedimentation tank. The sedimentation tank, or what we call as clarifiers, are generally circular in structure. So these are the mechanisms. So water after the cascade aeration comes here, and before entering the sedimentation tank, you have the flocculation and coagulation of the particulate matter. So here it comes and it settles, and what you see here is the clear water. This is the clear water, just overflows and comes into rapid sand gravity filters. So these are large filter houses. This is the filter house, and are you able to see my cursor? I hope so. Anyway, so these are the filter houses, and these are the series of filters, and the water is filtered through this sand filter, and the filtrate is collected at the bottom, and from the bottom is taken into a chlorination unit where you have generally for a very large plants you have gas chlorination. So you have these gas cylinders which is full of chlorine gas, and chlorine is taken out. We have a separate chlorination unit from where the chlorine from the gas is taken into this smaller unit, and it is dosed into the water. So that ends the treatment part as far as the drinking water is concerned. Now for groundwater, as I told you earlier, hardness can be removed by boiling. It can also be removed by resin bed, which is essentially what we call as a softener. So they are ion exchange resin beds, and they exchange the calcium and magnesium. And for the permanent type of hardness, we need to go in for a lime soda softening, where the calcium and magnesium is precipitated out. There are cases, in fact, many cases where the groundwater is contaminated with arsenic, which is very poisonous. Then you have iron, and you also have fluoride, which is one of the main contaminants. And we are quite well aware of the problems of fluoride in Puttaparthi itself and many of the places in Andhra Pradesh. Fluoride is a big concern as it causes fluorosis and other complications. And these components can be removed by chemical precipitation, by filtration, by adsorption, and by ion exchange resin beds, and also membrane processes, which is the reverse osmosis. So RO is one of the most sophisticated technologies for removing most of the dissolved components, including the monovalent like sodium and chloride. And the dissolved solids, like for example, C, you have to go in for softening, and then ultrafiltration and RO. Ultrafiltration is nothing but membrane-based system where you have membranes of 0.04 microns. So it filters all the particles above 0.04 microns, and it protects the downstream reverse osmosis membrane, which is a very expensive equipment in the whole water treatment plant. So this is just a flow sheet of how an industrial water treatment plant looks like. As I told you, industrial water requires very high purity water depending on the point of use. So in industrial water treatment, you have typically the source. Either there are corporations like, for example, MIDC, which is Maharashtra Industrial Development Corporation. They have their own water treatment plants. And these treatment plants are specifically for the use of the industries. So they supply the water to these industries. And if there is no surface water source, the groundwater becomes the main source of water. And then it goes through a series of treatment processes, like the main process may require a very high purity water. So you have certain treatment given for the processed water quality. Then you have demineralized plant, that is DM water. Again, it's an ultra pure water. You have to take it through a series of beds, anion cation exchange bed, and then you have mixed bed, and then further it is taken into the what you call the end use, where again they require very low percentage of cations and anions. Then for the pharma applications, as I told you earlier, you require sterile water and high purity water, which again is a separate treatment technology altogether. So water treatment per se, depending on the end use, have either a simple treatment like we do for drinking water application, and very complicated basically for the industrial use. So the cost of water treatment is dependent on the final quality that you require of the treated water. Now, more and more corporations, more and as the organization is increasing, the cities, the populations in the cities increasing, there is very little water available. And all these cities which are near to the sea are looking at seawater as the main source of drinking water. And this is predominantly true in most of the Middle East countries where there is absolutely no source of surface water available. And even if you have gone through the news a couple of weeks back, even in the USA, in California, they are water starved, and water has become a commodity for trading. So you can understand the future that we are going into if you don't have the source of water. And seawater is extremely expensive to be treated because it has to go through all the sophisticated technologies like the UF, the RO, and at the end of it, there is a byproduct which is highly concentrated and it is full of salt. How do you dispose the salt? That itself is a big problem. It's a big challenge. So things are not that easy. At the same time, if we are able to recycle and reuse most of the water, that is going to be our solution. So if you look at the average daily water consumption usage per person in the world, USA has the highest per capita consumption, as high as 600 liters per day per person. And then the European countries. So the water consumption in all these highly developed countries are very, very high. And I would say most of them are actually wasting the water, which is a very valuable resource. And if you see the graph, as the countries have become less and less developed, the water consumption also reduces, predominantly because it's not very cheap to buy water, treated water. And as the water consumption reduces, it means that all these countries who are getting less and less water, either because the source is limited, or their water treatment facilities are limited, or they are in a water starved area and water stressed area. And India is one of the water stressed area, and it has been said that in future India is going to go through a very difficult time in satisfying the water needs of majority of its population. So it is very important for us to understand how water has to be conserved and used as little as possible so that we conserve this water for our future generations. So unless you use water, there is no wastewater generated, right? So wastewater is nothing but the water that is used and wasted either by human activity or by industrial activities. So essentially it means you are using the highly treated water, you contaminate it by all your different types of uses, and then this contaminated water is just disposed, and generally it is left to the nature to take care of it. Of course nature takes care of it, but to a certain limit. It cannot go on doing this forever unless we intervene and we take responsibility for the waste that we generate. So I will now come into wastewater treatment, which is very important. I think it's the most important subject for all of us to understand, because we are all equally responsible for the amount of waste that is generated in the country and all over the world, in fact, the entire human population. 80% of the water that we consume, drinking water, 80% of the water we consume is converted to wastewater. And it predominantly comes from our bathrooms and toilets. And the source in a domestic wastewater is kitchen, washrooms, wash basins, and laundry. So you imagine you take 100 liters of water, only 20% is used for your normal consumption of cooking. And then 80% is what is a wastewater that you generate. So if you calculate per capita generation, you can imagine what will be the amount of wastewater that is generated. It runs into millions and millions. So I would again come back to the first slide, which I showed you about the state of water, the availability of water, where I said it's not an infinite source. It is a finite source. And we need to really be very serious in conserving water at source and minimizing the wastewater. And even because you cannot eliminate wastewater is going to be there. But how do you manage the wastewater? So it is best that we go and follow the principle of 3R, that is reduce, recycle, and reuse. There is no other option that is left. So as the population is growing, there is a lot of economic shift towards more resource exploitation. Intensive consumption patterns have been found for the global freshwater use. And the freshwater withdrawals for agriculture, industry, municipal uses, etc., has increased almost sixfold since the 1900s. Now, the chart shows that the rate at which the global freshwater use has increased from 1950 is alarming. But if you see there is a small drop, there's a small hope that the consumption is reducing. Only that is also towards the after 2000, because a lot of thrust has been put on recycle and reuse. And today, not only the industries, the municipal corporations also are very conscious about the fact that water needs to be conserved, water needs to be protected for the future generation, for the sustenance of this earth itself. And so we come to the topic of how to treat this wastewater, the domestic wastewater. I'm not going to touch on the industrial wastewater because it's a very vast subject. And the more the usage, the more complicated the wastewater becomes in terms of its components, its constituents, etc. So if you classify the domestic wastewater in terms of the generation, the majority, you have two classification. One is called as the black water and the other is the gray water. So black water is the urine and feces which is generated through the toilets, for usage of the toilets. Whereas the gray water is predominantly from the washing, your laundries, your bathing and kitchen. So you can segregate these two and recycle separately, or you can mix these together and then treat it together as a single domestic wastewater. It all depends on the place where you need to, and the ultimately the treated water quality that you require for where you are to go to, you're going to use the treated wastewater. Now, the typical consumption, the composition of sewage, domestic wastewater. The contaminants are predominantly suspended solids, which we have seen is also part of the water treatment, drinking water treatment. But the suspended solids is different from the suspended solids that you have seen in the drinking water. You also have the dissolved organics, which is classified or termed as BOD and COD. BOD is biological oxygen demand, and COD is chemical oxygen demand. Both are essentially the same, only thing depending on the analysis and the constituent, it is segregated. So it's very difficult to individually know what is the contaminant. Like I cannot keep on analyzing each and every component in the wastewater. So best is you take a parameter which defines the amount of contaminant, the what you call the scale of contaminants. And so when the biological oxygen demand or the BOD concept has come, where we know that when these water is without treatment, if you leave it to any water body, either lakes or rivers, there is a biological oxygen that it demands to naturally degrade these organics. So that is called as the biological oxygen demand. So there is an analysis which gives you how much is the BOD. And it's normally in the range of 180 to 350 milligram per liter. And chemical oxygen demand includes the BOD, but it also includes the organics which are non-biodegradable. So always the COD will be higher than the BOD. As you see, it is around 400 to 500 milligrams per liter. And then we have ammonia, which is all your amino acids, your proteins, what you eat, your digestion and your products. Byproducts of your digestion is predominantly nitrogen and phosphorus. So your sewage will contain ammonia, nitrogen, and organic nitrogen, and also phosphorus. And then the most important is your pathogens, your fecal coliforms and MPN, what we call as the MPN. So these are all indicators of the level of contaminants in a domestic wastewater. In a sewage treatment plant, there is a typical flow sheet where, depending on the constituents that you need to separate or treat, there is a flow sheet that has been developed, which is a very conventional flow sheet. So most of the sewage that is generated from the household, these are collected through drain pipes and it goes into, earlier there used to be septic tanks, but septic tanks also has become a problem because the overflow from the septic tank ultimately goes into your groundwater and contaminates the groundwater. So in large cities and municipal corporations, you have a sewerage connection system where the sewage from all these households are collected and conveyed through pipelines through to a centralized sewage treatment plant units, where all the contaminants of the sewage is treated stage-wise. So when there is a conveyance, if the conveyance is, even if it is through a pipeline or an open drain, which is normally not there. Nowadays, open drains are not permitted. It is generally through underground pipes. It contains a lot of floating matter because people just push in everything into the toilet. And when it comes to the end of the pipe, where it comes into the sewage treatment plant, you will find all sorts of things that are irresponsibly put by people into the toilets. They just flush it through the toilet. So it contains a lot of floating matters which needs to be removed. So then you have what you call as the screening, bar screening, where there are a lot of mechanical screens which traps all the floating matters, and downstream the water goes minus all these floating matters. The floating matters are screened and there are raking mechanisms where it is taken out and then separately mixed with the solid waste management and dumped. Now, after that screening is done, it still contains a lot of heavy particles having specific gravity of more than 2.5, which is predominantly sand and other things which it picks up on the way. And that also has to be separated. So we give something called as a grit removal system or a grit separator. Or the grit separator is again a settling tank, because anything beyond 2.5 settles very fast. So all the grit is separated, and whatever particulate matters are mixed along with the top layer of the settling tank, it goes into what we call as a primary clarifier. Again, it's a settling tank where you can add chemicals and settle the colloidal matter. So it's basically a solid liquid separation equipment. And once the insoluble particulate matters are removed, what remains in the sewage is predominantly dissolved organics in the form of BOD and COD, which I mentioned earlier, which has to be removed by a biological system. Biological, here we use chemistry, we have to use microbiology, we have to use everything. So it's basically an interdisciplinary field. And so you need to have a good knowledge about the micro organisms, how the bacteria actually functions. And so what is done, which actually occurs naturally, is basically put into a mechanized unit, what we call as an aeration tank. We give oxygen as a source because the bacteria uses the organics as its food source, converts it into water vapor and also energy. It gets energy, and part of it is converted into new biomass. For that, we require oxygen. Oxygen is supplied through air blower system. We have a diffuser system. I'll show you some of the photographs which will show you actually how the plant looks like. So what happens is the bacteria converts the dissolved organics into water vapor, and that is actually what is getting treated. So at the end of the aeration tank, you have the biomass, that is the excess biomass that is generated, the bacterial biomass, which needs to be separated again, because you need to have a clear water at the end of the treatment plant. So what goes into the settling tank is nothing but treated water along with the excess biomass. These biomass is settled in the clarifier. This is called as a secondary clarifier. And from there, the sludge is taken out from the bottom for further treatment for sludge digestion and other things, which I will talk about in a few minutes from now. And the clear water, again, has to be chlorinated because it is predominantly fecal coliforms and other pathogens. It is not rid of most of the pathogens. So you have to chlorinate it. And after chlorination, if it has to be discharged to any receiving water body, then it can be discharged, where the levels of BOD and COD has been fixed by the Pollution Control Board. It suspended solid concentration cannot exceed more than 30 milligrams per liter. Your BOD, total BOD, has to be around 30 milligrams per liter. And actually, the nitrogen and phosphorus also need to be very low. But somehow in India, yet the nutrient removal has not been given so much of importance. But if you don't remove the nutrients, the nitrogen and phosphorus, is going to cause eutrophication of all the water bodies where this treated sewage is, ultimately going. So the fundamental principle is that after treatment in a sewage treatment plant, all these treated water will get diluted further, either in the receiving water body like a river or a lake or any other water body where there is some source of fresh water also coming in. So as I told you, I'll just run through the flow sheet. This is a pre-treatment, and you can see there is a screen, a mechanical screen, where continuously it removes the floating matter from the sewage, and the floating matter is separated from the water. And then it comes into a grit chamber. So the grit chamber is basically, again, a sedimentation tank. And in the sedimentation tank, the grit is removed at the bottom. There is a scraper. From the grit is scraped at the bottom and taken to a central point, from where it is again separated of the organic material, because the sand also contains a lot of organic material. So you have a rake classifier where it separates the actual sand from the organic matter. The organic matter is returned back into the sewage treatment plant. And after the separation of grit and screenings, it goes into a primary treatment, the primary clarifier. It's essentially, again, a civil tank, an RCC tank that is constructed in a circular configuration. It could be rectangular configuration, but circular is easier because you have the mechanism, what we call as the rake mechanism. It's a mechanical equipment with a motor and a gearbox, and it rotates at the bottom very slowly. It rotates at the bottom because whatever settled sludge is there, it has to be taken into a central well from where there is a pipe for discharge of the sludge. So this sludge from a primary clarifier is very rich in organic matter. It is full of calories. So it goes to a sludge digester where it is anaerobically digested downstream, and you can generate biogas from the anaerobic digester of the sludge. So once your suspended solids are predominantly taken off from the water, the next step is to remove the organics, that is the BOD and COD. And as I told you, there's a typical aeration tank. These are again all RCC tanks, which contain the wastewater or the domestic wastewater. And you have the aeration system where you have a blower along with fine bubble diffusers. The fine bubble diffusers are given because you need to have the efficiency of the blower to reduce the power consumption. And just to give an idea, any sewage treatment plant, the maximum cost of treatment goes for the oxygenation, that is the air blower. You have to have massive air blowers to supply the amount of air that is required for the bacteria to oxidize the BOD and COD organic materials and treat the water and reduce the BOD and COD in the treated water outlet. And hence the maximum, almost 60% of the energy used in the sewage treatment plant is only going for providing air for the aeration system. So once the aeration tank performs, the microorganisms perform the duty of removing the dissolved organics, it is taken further into a settling tank where the sludge is settled and the clear water comes out of the clarifier, which is predominant. It is more or less very clear except for some particulate matter again. And so if you see the comparison between drinking water and wastewater treatment, the units for settling tank remains almost the same. And also the downstream filters also remain the same. But here we are actually separating the biomass and not a particulate, the inorganic particulate matter, unlike which is there in the drinking water system. And part of the sludge or the sludge is recycled back. This is called as a return activated sludge because you have to maintain a concentration of around 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams per liter of biomass in the aeration tank. And the excess biomass that is generated, it is wasted. It goes into the sludge digester as shown on the previous slide. So this is a typical cross section of the anaerobic digester, wherein the sludge that is separated from the primary stage, as well as the biomass that is separated from the secondary, that is the biological system, can be combined and put into a digester. And here again, it's an anaerobic system. There is no oxygen. So in absence of oxygen, the biomass gets into an endogenous phase where it becomes cannibalistic and it eats itself. But what happens in that due course is it goes through a series of biochemical reactions, and finally you have methane as the gas, the biogas, which is predominantly methane, carbon dioxide, and H2S to a certain degree. But essentially it is all methane which can be used. So the effluent gas is collected at the top because the gas will go up, and the gas can be taken into a gas holder from where it can be reused back into either you can use it for cooking, or the gas can be used to generate electricity through a dual fuel engine. So a lot of plants today are going in for biogas recovery from the waste, because ultimately every wastewater treatment is full of energy. It is full of energy, and there is a lot of organics present in the wastewater. And what happens to the digested sludge? The digested sludge is further dewatered. All the water component is removed, and you see to it that you have maximum solids into it so that the volume of the waste reduces. So there's a cost attached to transportation of the sludge also. Then it is given hydrothermal treatment, wherein you can convert the sludge, the biosludge, into solid fuel, and which can be used back into the industries like biorefinery. It can go into a lot of other uses like electricity generation or source of heat. And also it can be used as natural fertilizer. A lot of these digested sludge is taken by farmers, local farmers, and used as a fertilizer for their fields. Now, the treatment doesn't end there after the biological system, Because if you have to reuse the water, now most of the treated water sewage is used back into gardening. It can be used for toilet flushings. It can be used for car washings. It can be used as a cooling tower makeup by the industries. So there are various uses of this treated water. Instead of using the fresh water, you can as well use the sewage that is treated and reuse back into these non-potable applications. And this is what is done predominantly all over the world today, because most of the sewage that is generated, they are trying to reuse as much as possible. So for getting the quality of that water, where the reuse quality needs to be better than the secondary treated water, you go for a tertiary treatment. Again, the tertiary treatment is predominantly filtration. You have sand filters. Then post-filtration, you can chlorinate. You can even chlorinate before it goes into the filters. And then you can use ozone, or you can use UV also as a disinfectant, where your treated water becomes completely pathogen free. And even if somebody touches it by mistake, it is free from any hazards. Otherwise, if it's untreated, it is a hazard for the health. So similarly, like drinking water, there is an Indian standards which has been formed by the Central Pollution Control Board, where your treated water sewage or treated water in terms of industries also, there are different standards. But treated sewage has to meet certain standards based on the point of discharge. If it is an inland surface water, the concentrations of the components like oil and grease, you have particulate matter, ammonia, nitrogen, etc. are different. If it is the public sewers, which means it goes downstream for further treatment, then it is different. You can use it for land irrigation. So land irrigation, the treated water quality is slightly more relaxed, because ultimately it is used up by the soil and the plant. And then for a coastal disposal, again, there is a different standard. So the standards have been very well laid by the Pollution Control Board, depending on the point of discharge, the discharge of the treated water. So can we treat this water to drinking water standards? So that's a big question that everybody has in their mind. Yes, we can treat the sewage, the domestic sewage, to a purer form of drinking water, which will be much purer than what you're currently getting from your source, either groundwater or even your freshwater source. And this is being done in Singapore, where the sewage is treated into drinking water. It is bottled, and it is also given to people who visit their plant. But the only problem is there's a psychological limit. There's a psychological barrier where people do not want to drink. But I can tell you this is purer than most of the drinking water that we receive in our houses. And so they are encouraging people to reuse the sewage back into drinking water. It's absolutely safe, absolutely odorless, tasteless, and very, very pure. So maybe this may be the future. It's going to be, as I told you, water has already started getting traded. Some of the hard facts that we need to know about wastewater treatment plants are that they are highly capex intensive. There's a lot of capex in the sense of instead of providing all this equipment, it is not cheap. It is very expensive. The operation cost is also very high, because as I told you, 60% of the operating cost is only for the biological system, the air blower itself. Then you have the power requirement for the pumping and all other equipment, your agitators, etc. So it's highly OPEX intensive. There are also chemical use, large quantities of chemicals that are used, like the chlorine for disinfection. We have ozone. Ozone is also very expensive. And then there is no resource recovery. So in all conventional wastewater treatment plant, there has been no resource recovery as part of this waste treatment plant. So if you look at this diagram, it shows that it is highly powered and energy intensive. It uses a lot of chemicals, and the treated water is simply disposed. There was no thought also from the municipal corporation to reuse it. And the sludge was being disposed in some landfill, where it will again go back into the soil. So what is the future? The future has to be a circular economy, the only option that we have for sustenance. We need to recirculate the water. We need to recycle the water. We need to recycle the nutrients that are present in wastewater. We also need to reuse the energy. That means we need to generate energy from wastewater rather than using energy to treat the wastewater. So there's a lot of paradigm shift in the thought process. There's a lot of work going on, and in the next 5 to 10 years, you will find that most of the sewage treatment plant will become a source of energy generation rather than a source of energy sink. So we are going towards that end. So some of the recent advances, as I told you, a paradigm shift is use less chemicals, generate electricity, and generate byproducts in the form of bioplastics and fertilizers from the sludge. And you can go for a zero liquid discharge where not a drop of water goes out of the premises. It is 100% recirculated and recycled back to non potable or potable use if people are okay to drink it. And also evaporate the small volume of waste that is generated, because all these recycle plants will require a reverse osmosis plant where there is a portion called as a rejects, which is basically you're concentrating all the salts and converting most of the water into a very high purity water through the membranes. But the reject has to be managed. For the reject to be managed, it has to go through an evaporator where you evaporate this small quantity of water. The byproduct of the evaporator is salt. So all your salts, predominantly sodium chloride, will again be recovered back from this wastewater treatment plant. So the entire focus has now shifted to make the wastewater treatment plant not a place where all the resources are being used, but to generate resources and preserve all our valuable resources that are already there.
Sairam sir, we have 5
What are
minutes
the
to
drivers
conclude,
of
sir.
paradigm shift? One is reduce at source by segregated treatment, which also reduces the cost of treatment and the complexity of treatment. Reduction in energy consumption. Basically, as I told you, 60% of the energy is used for aeration. So you have new technologies that are coming in, wherein you have anaerobic and aerobic combination. So anaerobic doesn't require much of energy. In fact, it generates energy. So a lot of thrust is being given to use anaerobic and anaerobic as a combination and reduce the net energy consumption, and also to increase the energy, in fact, to generate the energy. So if you see the reduction, so also reduction of footprint and resource recovery from waste. So these are some of the latest developments that are going on. So just to give you an idea, the organic component is almost 14.7 kilojoules per kg COD of energy. And then you have so much of energy that can, power that can be generated. You can generate as high as 140 gigawatts of power from the wastewater treatment plant. And this is going to be a reality in the future, in the next another 10, 15 years. So this is one of the plant where the entire plant is energy positive. It is generating energy and supplying it to the grid, and it is not going consuming any energy. It is generating its own energy and using it in the plant. So there is no energy being taken from the government supply. In fact, the excess energy is being given back to the grid. Thank you. And if you have any questions, you may please ask.
Sairam sir, thank you very much, Dr. Shamraja, for your wonderful presentation, outlining the criticality of water as a resource, and also giving a very detailed presentation about the various protocols and the treatment processes which are employed for the treatment of water and wastewater treatment as well. So I have a few questions in hand. I would like to ask them. So RO water treatment as a tertiary treatment process, it generates a lot of waste in terms of the water resources, because around 40 or 50% of wastewater is generated, which is rich in salts. And also the water pH, the final pH of this water which we drink, that is also is very, very debatable. Like there are some recent news about basic pH levels being better than neutral pH, and also about what about the shelf life of those kind of membranes, and are there any alternative technologies like bioremediation filters using algal filters? Can they be an alternative to the RO treatment processes?
Actually, there's a lot of lag in the question. So I hope I've understood your question properly. Well, your question one is on the pH, the pH that is permitted for drinking water. Yes, for drinking water, the pH is around 7, I would say, which is what is desirable. It can go up to 7.58 also. It is not very... So the other thing is regarding the membrane life. The membrane life, if you're talking about a domestic wastewater treatment plant, the membrane life is normally around 3 to 4 years. But again, it depends on how you operate the plant. Depending on the skilled operation, and if it is an automatic operation, and depending on the variations in the wastewater, the RO membrane life can go up to more than 5 to 6 years as well. So that RO is a very expensive proposition. However, at the end of it, when your overall treatment cost comes down per unit volume, the RO membranes cost is also coming down because of the scale of operation today. But yes, not every treated water quality requires an RO. You can use ultrafiltration also. After ultrafiltration, you can even use a treated water. RO is essentially only for removal of dissolved solids. It is not for anything else. It's only the salts, and that also is used for monovalent ions, and mostly your chlorine and sodium, chloride and sodium ions. Yes, algal bioremediation can be given to wastewater, but it has not picked up a lot. A lot of research has gone on algal use for treatment of wastewater. But the challenge remains of separation of algae from the water after treatment. Bacteria settles very fast, so it is not a problem. However, algae doesn't settle so easily, and that is where the challenge lies.
Thank you very much, sir, for your elaborate answers about these questions. So, due to limited time, we will stop this session here. But we would like to interact more about this kind of features, especially regarding this wastewater treatment, because it will be a great asset not only to the university, but it is a very general topic where like a lot of utilization is pending, and I guess like people with your kind of expertise will be very helpful in guiding us in the right direction.
Sure.
Thank you very much,
Please
sir.
do get in touch.
Thank you very much, sir, once again.